Wait a minute, I'm naked. Did you actually strip me? What were you planning to do? Though I intended to enjoy skiing on our company trip, I never expected to end up rescuing the president's daughter and getting yelled at for it. I tried desperately to explain, but the next workday, our president, Mr. Carter, and his daughter glared at me as they approached. "Could you come to the headquarters after work? We need to talk." I gulped nervously. It's not every day that Mr. Carter personally visits me at our subsidiary. And his expression suggested this wasn't going to be good news. As I steeled myself and headed to the headquarters. "My name is Michael. Just a regular office worker. I leave home at 8 a.m. and arrive at the office by 8:30 a.m. My workday starts with a lively morning meeting and ends with the exhausted employees saying, 'See you tomorrow.' Thus, my unremarkable daily life continues, day after day. And today, as usual, nothing changes, and my typical day begins. My always energetic boss, Charles, takes charge of the morning meeting, but today he seems unusually cheerful. 'Good morning, everyone.' Everyone. He never says that. Why is he in such a good mood? The other employees must have been thinking the same thing. Everyone looked at each other, puzzled. But oblivious to that, Charles took a deep breath and announced enthusiastically, "Next month, our company, Continental Holdings, is having its company trip. And guess what? Mr. Carter has recognized our hard work again this year, and we get to have a joint trip with the main office staff. Block off the first Friday through Sunday of next month, especially you, Michael." Charles loudly singled me out from the back of the room. "It's different from the usual drinking sessions I invite you to. Make sure you're free." Everyone suddenly looked at me. Since I joined the company, Charles has been inviting me out to drink, and I have been turning him down. Initially, no one thought much of it, but after repeatedly inviting and being refused, Charles started asking despite knowing I'd say no, turning it into a comedic routine. Laughter echoed around me, and I raised my hand. "Do we get paid for this company trip?" Some employees burst out laughing. "There's no way, you fool." Charles didn't miss a beat, and the room erupted in laughter. "Well, not bad." Looking at Charles, he too seemed pleased, laughing contentedly. Charles cleared his throat and continued. "Anyway, really, make sure to keep it free. It'll be a more valuable experience than money." "Will the president's daughter be there too?" another employee asked Charles. Touching his chin, Charles paused, then grinned and replied, "Well, she works at the headquarters, so yeah, she'll probably be there." At his answer, everyone got super excited. Around me, people were saying things like, "We need to reserve roses at the florist," or "I have to get a nice outfit tailored." The president's daughter is quite famous within the company, and her reputation even reaches our subsidiary. It's no exaggeration to say she was born a personification of beauty and brains. Not only is she gorgeous, but she also works in sales at the headquarters, maintaining the top performance for several years. Rumors suggest she might become the president herself before long. Although I'm technically a fellow employee, she seems so far out of my league that I can't even see her as being the same kind of human. And now, she will be joining the same company trip. While everyone else is buzzing with excitement, the reality of it doesn't feel quite real to me, and I can't keep up with everyone's high spirits. Well, even if we're all from the same company, there's a difference between the parent company and a subsidiary. There's no way we, the subsidiary staff, would actually chat and have fun with those executive types. While I thought this, the day of the company trip arrived. "Oh, Michael, you actually made it." "What's with that tone? It sounds like you didn't expect me to come." "Well, you always turn down my invitations." "That's because it's just drinking with guys." "What? Would it be better if I were a woman?" Suddenly changing his tone, Charles struck a dramatic pose and pretended to tear up. I just walked past him and boarded the bus. It's a joke, I'm usually just tired after work. Drinking with a boss just makes me worry about the next day.
But you'd decline even if the next day was off, right? I want to spend my days off with my girlfriend. At the mention of a girlfriend, everyone around us buzzed with surprise.
As I looked back in confusion, Charles's mouth was wide open in shock.
You had a girlfriend.
Charles says so. At my nod, Charles staggered back as if he couldn't believe it. Well, we've broken up now. My casual mention of the breakup seemed to completely floor Charles. As Charles struggled to fix himself, I stored my luggage in the overhead compartment of the bus. Just as I finished, Charles grabbed my shoulder firmly. It seems he plans to comfort me through this trip. One by one, others joined in, offering words of consolation and encouragement, patting my shoulder as they took their seats. Moved by their gestures, I took my seat, and the bus rocked towards the venue. Upon arriving, I immediately wished for my previous emotions back. Everyone was too busy stretching their necks towards the bus from the headquarters to notice me. Even Charles was among them. Sighing deeply, I disembarked from the bus. This is why I can't stand these guys. They were all staring at the famous president's daughter. Charles called my name and gestured for me to come over. Drawn by his call, I headed towards him. And there was a woman descending from the headquarters bus. The moment I saw her, my eyes widened in surprise. Yes, I had heard the rumors, but she was even more beautiful than expected. Though other employees were there, she stood out distinctly. It wasn't just her beauty. She seemed to radiate a special aura. I had thought we were not the same kind of human just from the rumors, but seeing her confirmed it. Truly, we live in different worlds. Noticing us, she glanced our way.
Hey, she looked this way.
Our eyes met. Nonsense. She was definitely looking at me. The crowd around me buzzed. Despite myself, I thought our eyes had met. Thinking it was just my imagination, I quickly looked away. Watching the headquarters employees, including the president's daughter, enter, we followed suit, heading towards the luxurious hotel that was the venue for this trip. Staying at such a nice place for a company trip, Mr. Carter really splurged. As we casually talked about it, Charles called us to stop. It turned out that we wouldn't be staying at this luxurious hotel after all. We were led to a cottage, much smaller than the luxurious hotel, with just the bare minimum amenities. The employees, noticing the stark difference in treatment compared to the headquarters staff, entered their cottages grumbling. I wasn't complaining, but I was honestly shocked. What was the point of showing us this disparity? It hardly seemed like a genuine company trip. Despite these farts, feeling tired from the travel, I decided to relax alone in the cottage while Charles and the others went skiing. Though Charles and his group were grumbling, I found the rustic charm of the wooden cottage quite cozy. The view of the ski slope that Charles and others had headed to was also pleasant. Although the treatment couldn't compare to that at headquarters, I wondered if staying together might have been even more awkward. Maybe it was fortunate that we were housed separately. With these farts, I slowly closed my eyes on my bed. I'm not sure how long I slept, but I was awakened by a knocking at the door of the cottage. It was already dark outside, and the room was pitch black since I hadn't turned on any lights. I stumbled in the darkness toward the sound and finally managed to open the door, where a flushed Charles was standing. It seemed he had come to invite me for a drink. Apparently, skiing was over, and he had started drinking with the other employees at his cottage. Realizing I was missing, he had come to invite me personally. Exchanging jokes as usual, this time I accepted his invitation. Charles, looking pleased, headed back to his cottage, and I followed him. Arriving at the cottage, those who had started drinking earlier were nicely tipsy, and everyone seemed to be having a good time. Some were so tired from skiing that they had passed out after a few drinks. Then I joined in and drank with Charles and the others for the first time. We talked about various things over drinks. From romance to work, having conversations that we wouldn't normally have without the influence of alcohol. According to Charles, despite appearances, I was quite passionate. I didn't think so myself, but it wasn't unpleasant to be described that way. Since I'm not very good with alcohol, I drank slower than the others. Perhaps because of that, just as I was getting nicely buzzed, Charles and the others, tired from skiing, had fallen asleep drunk. Being the only one awake, I decided to go skiing to sober up, something I hadn't managed during the day. The weather was quiet, with just light snow falling as I moved from Charles's cottage back to mine. However, as I prepared to ski and stepped out of the cottage, a light blizzard had begun. It was just starting, but it was night, and I hesitated for a moment, yet having prepared, I moved toward the ski lift to check the conditions. As I moved, the wind grew stronger, and visibility worsened. Reaching near the lift, I judged it too dangerous to ski and turned back. At that moment, something strange caught my eye. There was a small forest near the lift, with a slight pile of snow arranged to prevent slipping into the woods. Behind it, skis were oddly stuck in the ground. Approaching curiously, I found a person lying there. Seeing this, my buzz faded instantly. I rushed over and tried calling out as loudly as I could, but there was no response. I approached closer and turned the person over from a face-down position, gasping when I recognized her. It was our company's president's daughter. I shook her again, but she didn't respond. Checking for breathing, I removed her face mask and felt for breath. Warm air brushed slightly against my hand. Thank goodness, she was breathing. Realizing this, I reached for my phone to contact someone from headquarters. But searching my pockets, I couldn't find it. That's right, I had left it in my cottage. After a moment of thought, I decided to take her back to my cottage first. Once we arrived at the cottage, I was more concerned about her condition than contacting anyone, so I decided to check on her first. I didn't know how long she had been lying there, but her ski wear was soaking wet, which is why her body felt as cold as ice. I hesitated for a moment, but hoping the clothes under her ski wear were dry, I began to remove her wet garments. However, my prayers were not answered. The clothes she wore underneath were also soaked and chillingly cold. I found myself torn between two feelings: the moral duty to protect her as a fellow human by removing all her wet clothes, and the guilt of a man stripping the clothes off a woman, especially the president's daughter. Of course, to protect her, I needed to remove her clothes, but I kept wondering if it was truly necessary.
Is it really necessary, though?
After going back and forth in my mind, I decided it was critical to warm her up with a dry blanket, and with great remorse, I removed all her clothes. After ensuring her safety and wrapping her in a blanket, I tried to contact someone from headquarters. However, perhaps due to the late hour, no one answered despite several attempts. I gave up and continued to monitor her condition. Her breathing had been shallow before, but now I could hear her breaths if I came close. Lightly touching her cheek, I could tell her body temperature was returning to normal. It seemed things were settling down. The tension I had been holding released all at once, and I felt a wave of exhaustion. Yet, I couldn't let my guard down. Since she hadn't regained consciousness, and anything could happen. With that thought, I sat down on a chair beside the bed and watched her sleep. Her sleeping face was also very beautiful. Her long eyelashes, and now that her body temperature had normalized, her lips had a healthy color. At that point, I realized that I had nothing to do but watch her beautiful sleeping face. Then, I remembered something that had caught my attention. When I was undressing her to wrap her in the blanket, it was what looked like a scar from a burn on her left arm. At the time, I was too frantic about warming her up to check properly. But I remembered seeing a noticeable mark running vertically from her wrist to her elbow. Now that there was nothing else to do, my concern about the burn scar grew. I felt guilty about looking at her body again, but I thought it would be okay if I carefully adjusted the blanket to just check the scar. As I touched the blanket, her eyelids twitched. I quickly withdrew my hand and straightened up, freezing in place. She then moaned softly and slowly opened her eyes. Suddenly, she started coughing as if something had gotten into her airway. In a panic, I slipped my hand behind her back between her and the bed, helping her to sit up. Even though I asked if she was okay, there was no response. Her consciousness still seemed foggy. Once the coughing stopped and her awareness seemed to sharpen, she began to grasp her surroundings. First, she realized she was naked and wrapped in a blanket. Next, she looked around and saw she was on a bed in a cottage. And finally, she made eye contact with me, realizing she was alone with a man she didn't know. As soon as she put everything together, she screamed and shoved me away forcefully. I fell off the chair and slammed against the wall of the cottage. "Who are you? Why am I naked? You're the worst," she shouted, hurling insults at me. "Please calm down," I said, wincing in pain but extending my left hand in a gesture to calm her. I grabbed my jacket that was nearby and tried to hand it to her. Turning to face the wall so as not to look at her directly, I felt her take the jacket from my hand. Relieved, I finally stopped facing the wall and turned my gaze back to her. When I explained the situation again, she seemed to understand everything and apologized, looking remorseful.
It's okay, I'm just glad you're safe. But why were you out there at night and alone? I felt like skiing at night, but before I could start, the weather turned bad, so I decided to head back. But it was too dark.
She spoke a bit sheepishly, and I had initially thought she might have accidentally skied into the woods. However, to learn she was there even before skiing was surprising. "I'm glad you're safe. That was unexpected of you." She looked at me curiously. "You're quite playful, aren't you?" Hearing this, she blushed a little. "Did that burn scar on your arm happen in a similar way?" Curiosity led me to ask about the burn scar that I had noticed earlier. Her expression darkened, and she shook her head slightly, while tracing the scar on her left arm. "This was done by a colleague at the company. Well, it was partly due to my carelessness."
Done by someone?
"Yes, it seems some don't like that the daughter of the president works just as hard and continues to stay at the top." She explained that she often faced harassment fueled by jealousy and resentment within the company. And of course, being the president's daughter, some people flirt with me while others make snide remarks. Working in a male-dominated environment, I had never heard such stories before. Hearing them from a woman for the first time was chilling. At the same time, a question occurred to me. That's terrible. If that's the case, why not quit? Your skills must be evident to others too. There's no need for you to suffer more than this. She fell silent upon hearing my words. Worried that I had said something wrong, I hurriedly apologized. "Sorry, that was insensitive of me." She quickly reassured me, perhaps feeling she had made me uneasy. "No, it's okay. I understand what you're trying to say." As we both calmed down, she started to speak in bits and pieces again. "It's tough, honestly, but I love working in sales more than anything." She continued. "I enjoy interacting with various people, of course, but what I love most is seeing negotiations succeed and watching both companies profit from that. It makes me feel like I'm genuinely contributing to society. No one has to tell me. Every time it happens, it feels like I'm being praised. That's what motivates me to keep going. I love that about my job." Her words resonated with me. After she finished, silence fell again. "Sorry for talking so much about myself." "No, It's the first time I've heard such a conversation. It's nice, actually. Really. Talking about work, especially with someone who loves their job at the headquarters, seems odd, but personally, I can't say I have the same passion. I joined a regular company, I perform decently, I live a standard life, and that's what suits me. Seeing someone like you, I can't help but feel we're different kinds of people. Hearing this, she chuckled. What are you saying? We're all human. To be honest, if you ask whether I love my job, I don't have the same passion as you. Sure, I have good relationships at work, but I'm there to earn a living, not for fulfillment. But you love your work. That's true. But I've just found something I love. Finding something you can be passionate about is incredibly fortunate. That's why I always feel blessed. It makes it even harder to think about quitting. Learning this gave me a deeper understanding of why she continued with her job, not just out of enjoyment, but also out of a sincere commitment. She wasn't just talented and beautiful, she approached her work with a genuine heart, exceeding her role. Knowing this made me feel even more drawn to her. Simultaneously, I thought to myself, it must be really enjoyable to work with you. Her expression soured slightly at my comment. I didn't mean to sound condescending. I didn't mean it like that at all. I was just thinking, if I could work with someone who enjoys their job as much as you, even the tough times would be enjoyable. When I said that, she stared at me in shock, her expression slowly turning into one of sorrow as tears began to fall. Seeing me confused by the sudden outburst, she covered her face with her hands. I'm sorry. It's just, nobody has ever said that to me before. Despite my panic, she continued in a tearful voice. It feels like I've been saved, thank you. I handed her a tissue from the room, waiting for her to calm down. After a while, she composed herself and looked around the small cottage again.
You did join this company trip, right?
Yes, and don't worry, it's quite comfortable here for me. You're different, aren't you? Is that so? But I must say, the difference in treatment between our subsidiary after the merger and the headquarters was quite shocking. As I spoke jokingly, as I would with Charles, she took it seriously and shrugged her shoulders. Yes, it's supposed to be a fun company trip, and yet they make such distinctions. I'm sorry. Her response seemed sadder than I expected, prompting me to clarify. It can't be helped, right, you. At this point, I stumbled over how to address her. Sensing my hesitation, she offered a helping hand. You can call me Samantha. Samantha, that's a nice name. Not that it's only nice. I mean, it really suits you. I blurted out, more than I intended, struck by how fitting the name was for her. Samantha chuckled at this, her face brightening with a different, charming smile. Caught up in her beauty, I almost let more truth slip out, but managed to compose myself.
It's not your fault, Samantha. It was decided by other staff, right?
Yes, but... Even as she agreed, she continued to giggle at my previous fumbling. So, you don't have to feel any responsibility. But, what's so funny now? I had to interject. She laughed heartily. Because your flustered reaction was just so funny. I didn't see what was so humorous, but her laughter made it hard to care too much. Looking out the window, I noticed that the blizzard had subsided. When I mentioned it to Samantha, she said it was probably time to head back to the hotel. Her clothes were not completely dry yet, but it was better to wear them for the short walk to the hotel. I stepped outside the cottage, waiting for her to finish dressing. Samantha emerged from the cottage and thanked me. Thank you for everything. You really helped me. It's good that nothing serious happened, I replied. Was it really nothing serious? She queried, causing me to blush as I remembered the night's events. About that, I'm sorry, I stammered. She laughed again. This time with a mischievous expression. Just kidding. Maybe we'll meet again sometime. I decided to watch her leave from the front of the cottage. Reflecting on everything that had happened, it seemed like a once-in-a-lifetime experience to have spent such a night with someone as beautiful as her. As Samantha walked away, she suddenly stopped and turned back. "By the way, I never got your name." Realizing that I hadn't introduced myself, I straightened up and said my name. "Michael." Samantha seemed to ponder for a moment as she uttered my name. I found her reaction curious, but before I could ask, she changed her expression to a pleasant smile and left the scene. 3 days later, after a day off following the company retreat, it was Tuesday. Normal life was about to resume. I left home at 8 o'clock and was at the office by 8:30 am. Work at the company usually began with an energetic morning assembly and ended with the exhausted employees saying, "See you tomorrow." Or at least, it was supposed to. That day, Charles, who usually led the morning assembly, came in sweating profusely, his face beet red. Behind him were none other than Mr. Carter from the headquarters and Samantha. The employees in the room gasped, but stood up and greeted them with as loud a voice as they could muster. Mr. Carter seemed satisfied with this, smiling and nodding approvingly. Samantha was smiling cheerfully beside him. Today, it seemed, was different from usual. Mr. Carter and his daughter were attending the morning assembly. Even Charles seemed nervous about the two being in the same space, still sweating. Actually, he looked a bit pale, more than just nervous. What could have happened? At the end of the morning assembly, which was different from usual. Normally, Charles would conclude with a call to action, "Let's all do our best today." But instead, Mr. Carter stepped forward to speak. "Last week, we had a joint retreat with the headquarters, and I've come here today to apologize. Despite the existence of both a headquarters and a subsidiary, we differentiated the treatment during the trip, causing discomfort. I acknowledge this was a shameful act on our part. My deepest apologies." With that, Mr. Carter himself apologized. Samantha followed with an apology too. She then continued to explain that they would consider improving the treatment of subsidiary employees, and that the person who organized this retreat had been put on suspension. The suspension might seem excessive, but it might be justifiable if it involves the company's image. Finally, Mr. Carter and Samantha apologized again, and the assembly ended. As we were about to return to our usual duties, "Michael?" I couldn't believe my ears. Did Mr. Carter just call my name? To confirm, I looked towards where Mr. Carter, Samantha, and even Charles were looking at me. "Michael, come here quickly." Surprised by Charles's urgent call, I hurried over to them. The others looked at me worriedly, wondering what was happening. "What time do you finish work today?" Mr. Carter asked. "If it's as usual, I should be done by 6 p.m., I responded. "Good, then stop by the headquarters after you're done. There's something we need to talk about," he said. His final words made me feel as if my heart was being squeezed. Had I done something? All I did during the retreat was help Samantha. If it was about thanking me, Mr. Carter's demeanor seemed too serious. I felt a different kind of pressure from him, not just gratitude. I felt as though I had aged over 10 years in a single day because of the pressure from Mr. Carter and the fear of what might be said at the headquarters after work. Nevertheless, I finished my regular duties and called Mr. Carter to inform him I was heading to the headquarters now. He said that a car was being sent over. Hearing that, I was truly at a loss. I asked Mr. Carter what this was about, but he replied with silence. Instead of an answer, he simply said he was waiting and ended the call. I was utterly confused. What did I do during the retreat? Could it be about the lack of motivation comment I made to Samantha? After much thought, my guess was that I might be fired based on that comment, which Mr. Carter heard about through Samantha. He certainly didn't look grateful for that pressure. there was no doubt about it. There might be some room for explanation, but it was unclear if it would be accepted. Yet, I was determined to speak my mind. With that resolve, I got into the car and headed to the headquarters. Upon arriving at the president's office, I knocked and heard Mr. Carter's deep voice saying, "Come in," deeper than it had been this morning. I hesitantly opened the door and saw Mr. Carter sitting at his desk with Samantha standing next to him. I stood across the desk facing the two of them. "First, let's start with a thank you. I heard you saved my daughter during the retreat," he began. "Yes," I replied. "I am thankful for that," he acknowledged. "I only did what was right," I responded. Mr. Carter nodded solemnly, his brow furrowing deeper. Then he continued, "This incident prompted me to look into you." Once again, I felt like Mr. Carter had grasped my heart with that statement. "You've been performing quite well in our company," he noted. "Huh? Considering that, and my daughter's recommendation, we've decided to appoint you as a member of the new project we're launching," he declared. "Huh? Wait, am I being fired today?" They hadn't expected my response, judging by their surprised expressions. Then Samantha burst into laughter, reminiscent of that moment before. "Why would you think that?" She laughed heartily while Mr. Carter continued. "It seems that when she heard my name, Samantha was lost in thought because she had heard the name Michael somewhere before. Curious, Samantha decided to look into who I was. It turns out that my name was frequently mentioned even before the company underwent the merger 3 years ago. Apparently, I had been recognized since that time." "Why would you be interested in someone like me?" I asked. Both Mr. Carter and Samantha said in unison, "Because you're excellent." Apparently, the merger was supposed to happen later, but it was somewhat expedited because of me. Whether that was a good thing was unclear, but to them, I was apparently seen as a key figure in the company's sales. Learning that Mr. Carter and the headquarters had such farts about me felt surreal. Then, Mr. Carter added, "We value your exceptional management skills, and that's why we chose you to be part of this new venture. We want you to support my daughter, you will be leading it." I had thought I might be fired for my seemingly lackluster remarks, so this news eased my mind considerably. And to think that I would get to work with Samantha. Of course, I won't let you say no. After all, you were the one who undressed and saw my daughter naked. I wouldn't have declined anyway, but I never expected to hear such a thing from Mr. Carter. Samantha, blushing, playfully chided him. "Oh, Dad, stop saying unnecessary things." Then, with a slight blush, she said, "Well then, that's settled. I'm looking forward to working with you, Michael." With that, she told Mr. Carter she would walk me to the entrance and hurried out of the office first. I was about to follow when Mr. Carter called out to me. "What is it?" I asked as I turned back. Mr. Carter stood up and approached me. "Have you heard about the treatment Samantha has been receiving from her colleagues at headquarters?" "Yes." "So, despite being labeled as my daughter, Samantha has always led the pack as an employee in our company. This new venture will be a fresh start for her," he said, placing his hands on my shoulders and gripping them tightly. "Please support Samantha. This is both a presidential order and a father's request." The hands gripping my shoulders carried the weight of someone who had served as the president of this company, and the weight of a father concerned for his only daughter. He must have faced many challenges. Such a person placing such high expectations on me was profoundly motivating. How could I not respond to that? "Of course, I will protect her no matter what," I replied. Pleased with my response, Mr. Carter nodded and gave my shoulders a firm pat. "I'm counting on you, and, as a man to another, when you start dating, do it properly, all right? If you're going to live together, you'll need to move out of the company housing," he added. The thought that Samantha, the president's daughter, and I could end up in such a situation seemed unlikely. Despite this, I could only laugh awkwardly at his unexpected precaution. Though I said one thing at the cottage, I hadn't really thought I'd actually be working with Samantha, which made me incredibly happy. But more than that, I felt the weight of a responsibility far different from my usual mundane routine, and a desire to meet Mr. Carter's expectations. All these feelings combined to invigorate me and fill me with determination. With our respective resolutions, we were about to take the next step forward in the journey that was about to begin.